Salutations, Shades, and welcome back to Talking with Shadows, the one-stop shop for all things strange and unusual. Today with your host, Marcus Dee. And joining me in the studio today, guys, I have another guest host. Please welcome to the studio, Frank Hessian.
Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. For those of you that are veterans to our channel and our content, Frank joined me in the episode over the Rue Guru, the Louisiana werewolf story that we covered down there, which actually, whenever Vic took a leave of absence and I had some guest hosts come in to fill in for him, that is the most popular video out of any of the hosts that actually came to join me. So I thought it'd be a great idea to bring Frank back into the studio today as we continue our talk on immortality, as today we're going to be talking about Nicolas Flamel. Now, I don't know for those of you that are familiar with our last episode that we did, but we did an episode on adrenochrome. During that episode, many of you expressed your condolences to Vic, who lost his father recently. He wanted to let you guys know he super appreciated that, and I let him know. And he should be coming back to the studio. I would guess either by the next episode or the episode after that. We're not rushing them, guys. We're, if you've ever been through something like that, you need to take your time and do it at your speed. So today, me and Frank are going to continuing our talk on immortality. We're going to be looking at Nicolas Flamel. So Frank, had you been aware of Nicolas Flamel prior to me asking you about it?
The name, ring a bell, and then I was like, why does it ring a bell? And you were all like, Harry Potter, and I was like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Harry Potter, the Sorcerer's Stone. If those of you guys were like, what, that and that? I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was actually, the title of that book, I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be Nicholas, like Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah.
But they had to change it because I don't think people really understood what that meant. Like they didn't really understand that, like the Philosopher's Stone is actually a magic item of myth, supposedly of myth. But we're going to be talking today. Could it be a reality?
Yeah, and I thought that was pretty wild. I was all like, weird how they took that name away. And when I looked at the justifications, apparently I think it got republished through Scholastic, and that time around they were like, Philosopher's Stone's too archaic. And first off, this is a children's book, man. They do not care what the name of that stone is.
Yeah, I think when I first read Harry Potter, that's how old I sound now. When I first read that book, when it first came out, I was like 13. And I think if you're a 13 or 10 to 13-year-old and you know what the Philosopher's Stone is, first of all, you're an incredible kid, by the way. But you are in a very small minority, let alone any adult that might actually know what the Philosopher's Stone is.
Yeah. Kids don't care, man. They could have called it the Whoosy Howsy What It Stone, and the kids would have read that damn book.
Absolutely. So what we're gonna do is, there's kind of some accuracy in the Harry Potter with what they were in the universe for what they were trying to do with the Sorcerer's Stone and Nicolas Flamel. So what we're gonna do today, guys, is we're gonna break down that story first. I mean, that's where the conversation is going to start. We'll see wherever it goes. We're going to talk to you guys today about more of that story. And we're going to kind of pick it apart a little bit and kind of see what we can kind of expand upon. And if those of you guys who've not been able to tell so far, Frank's Zooming or he's Skyping into the studio for this because of COVID. I recently got over COVID 2 weeks ago or a couple weeks ago, and trying to be a little bit more responsible for how we record the episodes in here. All right, you ready to dive into this, Frank?
Yeah. And I will say, having been freshly researching Nicolas Flamel, let me say, YouTube video wise, unless you speak Spanish or you are looking for strictly Harry Potter version of Nicolas Flamel, there is not a lot of actual YouTube video content on this guy. There
Oh,
was
no,
a
no.
few
Yeah.
there was a few videos that include him, but as far as literary research goes, unless you're looking for the fictional version, not a lot of actual YouTube videos. So this is as far as the podcast goes, as far as you guys uploading it out there into the World Wide Web, it's going to be touching on some things that not a lot of people are going to actually have some information on.
And I'm kind of happy that we're doing Nicolas Flamel in this episode because if you guys checked out our last episode on adrenochrome, that's a very dark topic when it comes to immortality. It
Yep.
is, and
Yep.
I hope that when whoever listened to it, that I did it justice, I did it right, and I did it the best that I could when we were talking about it.
You
Nicholas,
did.
yeah,
It
oh
was
yeah.
good.
I mean, there's still way more to talk about it, and I can tell you now, there's going to be a part 2 to that at some point. But anyway, Nicolas Flamel is a much lighter topic. I found if you guys are really trying to look into immortality stories, so Nicolas Flamel himself, like if you dive in him and you think about him and you think of him as this as an alchemist, that's what people's initial thought of Nicolas Flamel comes in. Nicolas Flamel actually was more known in the time he was living as a manuscript and scribe. Like he owned a shop, and that was what he did for a living. Was he made manuscripts, he repaired manuscripts, and he gathered them together in Paris, France, in the 14th and 15th century. He lived in there with his wife, and I always butcher her name. I'm gonna try to say this out phonetically. Perinel Flamel. I think is how you say it. Is how you pronounce her name. Okay, I got you now. And they lived in Paris, France for a while, running this shop. And after he died, he did not become known generally as an alchemist, as far as we know, until far, far later in the 17th century. Whenever new published works of his were coming out, people were putting together, they were claiming they put together work that he had been working on at the time and published it under his name, saying that at the time he was working on this alchemical formula for turning lead into gold and immortality.
Yeah, that was the I think if I remember correctly, that was the he did some illustrational works for the alchemical symbols.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever somebody published all the work, the introduction painted him up as this alchemist who was searching for gold, and there was this like grand like introduction. I'm trying to remember exactly how it goes. Like it was talks about his traveling to Spain and how he was looking for translations for the manuscripts, and then he meets this sage who identifies the book that Flamel is holding and wanting to get translated is the Flamel and the Mage, and then apparently he's like, "Oh, thanks for letting me know, kind sage," and the book for like several years, and then comes out with this decoded book that he gets a philosopher's stone from, and they actually say he first produced silver in 1382 and then gold. And I'm like, oh, okay. What I thought was wild is in that introduction, they just say it's just a sage that he meets on his things. But I actually saw additional research that actually had an actual name for this guy. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see the name of him.
Well, his title is the Wandering Jew, and it's this this mythical, immortal character who's supposed to be really prevalent in Europe around like the 13th, 14th century area, and he's supposed to be connected to the crucifixion of Christ, either because he himself taunted Christ while he was on the cross, or because he was like Pontius Pilate's, door greeter. So there's already like this heavy religious element already. Like as soon as you get into like the history of this, there's already this heavy religious element that the guy who tells Flamel about like the book and the secrets is this potential like immortal Jewish character who's doomed to wander the land.
Yeah, that's a part of this story that's just left out. I think when with people that are even in the know on the story of Nicolas Flamel is they don't really understand the real religious undertones that occur in this book that he supposedly had decoded.
Yeah.
And one of the weird things that I found was the book that supposedly gets published about Flamel. You know, even though he lives in France, this book actually gets published in London. Like in it, and the book that supposedly is published, it's called The Exposition of Hieroglyphical Figures. And if I dived really deep into this book because I really wanted to know more about exactly what is the method. Because I think a lot of time when people think of alchemists, they're thinking of this like, a chemist, like this chemist of ancient times hiding in a hut, like early chemistry, and that was part of it. That was an element that was a part of that. But there are strong like magical undertones for ancient alchemy, and especially even in the book that Nicolas Flamel supposedly had decoded. The book that he supposedly decoded used this magical formula called magical squares. And if you don't know what magical squares are, think a Sudoku puzzle with letters instead of numbers. And this would have been the method that supposedly, at least I would say the vehicle that Flamel probably had to take in order to transmute, lead into gold and eventually gaining immortality is using these things called magic squares. So what you would do, and I'm breaking this down because I had to get Vic to help me out with this because you know way more about this. He had to explain it to me. So what you would do is say you wanted to make something that would let you breathe underwater. So that's the classical example that's in this book. And what you would do is you would take a word for water, and sometimes you even have to figure out what word that is in what language, and you would put it in your square just like a Sudoku. So you'd have to do water up, down, left, right, mixed up, all in this in order to find the right combination to complete the square. And then you would once you have the square, you essentially have discovered the true name, not necessarily, but at least you have a better magical understanding of the word, and that allows you to appeal it to a higher being to essentially create the spell or create the effect that you were going for. And that is an extreme oversimplification of what I said in there, but that's honestly the easiest way that I can just break it down. I think Vic probably, if he was here, he could explain it better, but it's still super complicated when you're trying to do it. Two other very famous people that used this method of magic. One, a person you guys may not know, Jonathan Dee, by the way, who I take my name from. That's where that I take my pen name from. Used this formula. He used this, as well as Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was very known for using magical squares in his magical practices.
That's spooky. He's a creepy, spooky dude. I mean, anybody that is, eerie enough to have Ozzy Osbourne write a song about you, I mean, that's a creepy dude.
And it really changes I think for me, the way that you think about Nicolas Flamel when you're trying to think about how he achieved immortality through this process. Now, I'm not saying this exactly is the way that he did it like verbatim, but this is definitely the roadmap that he must have taken. We've been able to at least translate this book now to the point where we at least understand that magical squares was the tools that was used in order to in this book. So if this supposedly is where Nicolas Flamel got it, this is at least the vehicle that he got to get there.
Well, and one of the biggest things on alchemy is the fact that a lot of the knowledge is through symbology, and with a lot of the terms, that we actually see people using in alchemy, when they say philosopher's stone, there is a lot of definitions as to what it actually is.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Stone can be a very ambivalent term.
Yeah, and that was something that through what I was looking through on the Philosopher's Stone, particular era where Nicolas Flamel was researching alchemy. This is where alchemy was starting to evolve kind of towards chemistry. Like this is kind of that era, and that really actually hits its peak around the 1600s because right here what you said about that book being published in England at that time, that the book that he actually wrote, that Nicolas Flamel wrote, that's actually the time frame. I think it was 1404. England outlawed alchemy because King Henry IV was like, they're going to take an element and they're going to double it. They're going to clone it. If they do that with gold and silver, they'll be able to overthrow us. And then now we're going to have another uprising on our hands. And apparently, like, Henry IV dealt with many uprisings already at that point. So probably at that point, he was like, we're going to stop it before it starts. And he was just like, we're just banning alchemy. So it's like the monarchy is scared of it at that point. But like you said, he's French. He's in Paris, France. So it's not even like he's even in, England to be, persecuted by the king. So I thought that was really wild. But anyway, going back to what I was saying though about the symbology of the stone in itself actually, could be anything. I mean, it doesn't. Some describe it as red or white. Some say it's an actual rock. Some say that the stone is a metaphor or a euphemism for something else entirely. I started digging into some other stuff, and it can get real religious real quick as far as what the stone actually represents.
Oh, absolutely, and that's very common throughout alchemy for there to be these uses of metaphors throughout alchemy, because that's something too that I think people don't really understand about alchemy is it's not very straightforward. Ancient alchemists, it was super common that one of the things that they would do is they would cover their tracks and keep their work hidden using codes, using symbols, using metaphors. There's even accounts of alchemists using paintings to hide their formulas and their equations. They would hide it in art, in tapestries. So that way people cannot replicate their work. And I think there's two reasons for that. That this could be for. One, and obviously we're going to throw it out there. If you've discovered, if you're a fraud and you're really just, it's all smoke and mirrors, you don't want people to be able to replicate your work and not be able to do it. I mean, that's part of the scientific method is for people to be able to replicate it. So if you're a charlatan, you don't want people to know what it is. You want to keep your way you do this secret. But the other reason for why you would want to do this is because if you have tapped into something or that's really dark, or one of the ingredients is something that is not socially acceptable, that is another reason about why you would want to keep this under wraps. And I talked about this in our adrenochrome video because I was saying like if you had a component to your alchemy being something like the sucked essence of fear of children, that is absolutely something that you would probably not walk around telling people that you do on the regular or that you can. That is the fastest way probably to make yourself public enemy number one.
I mean, kind of, yeah. I, I I just don't see the whole hey man, you want to like numb this adrenaline gland, and somebody's all like, sure, where'd it come from? Oh, don't ask, don't tell. It's
Yeah.
like, no.
If you think about too the element of alchemy, especially with magical squares and how they work, again, you have to appeal to some sort of higher being. Now, in the book that Nicolas Flamel supposedly used, and I think John Dee was the same way, if I'm correct, but don't quote me on this one. But I know for release in the book that Flamel was supposed to have used. That said that you complete the square and then you appeal to an angel, like an angel, for the effect of whatever that you're going for.
Well, it says like that. That's one of the things I thought was really wild is in that era they actually identified there were two types of magic, and the two types are the ones where you either make deals with demons or the deals that you make with deities, or the divine. But like in Eastern regions, there was even a Philosopher's Stone variant for like one that Buddha actually held, or like a Philosopher's Stone that like different other Eastern cultures actually had. And I thought that was actually kind of wild. Is that one of the ones that one of the videos I stumbled across? I actually found this one that showed me. It was talking about comparisons on terminology and comparing it to Masonic information, because like they were saying like how like Freemasons use certain terms and terminology to reference things within their own order, and they were like it's really similar towards how like alchemists were. Like alchemists would use symbols and terms that didn't actually pertain to what they were really working with, because it was about what it represented, not what it actually was. And they incorporated like the faith aspect with that as well. I thought that was actually really interesting, is the idea of immortality. They were even arguing it may not be immortality on the mortal plane, but on the spiritual plane.
You see, and that's where I started having to think a little bit more about, the method that Nicolas Flamel supposedly used, using magic squares in appealing to supposedly some sort of angelic being. Because again, if you look at it 100% of just this is the book he used, this is the route that he did, and he appealed to some sort of angel. Well, that means that he's appealing to an angel, either a Christian version of Christian version of an angel or a Jewish version of an angel. Now, I can buy maybe getting material wealth, being blessed by something. I can write that away in a way. But when I think about immortality, and I think about, if you look at those two faiths and how they view immortality and lasting life, like again, if we're looking at it from the Christian perspective, the only way that you live forever spiritually, or physically, is through, accepting Jesus Christ, and that's the only way. I mean, he says that I am the way, I'm the only way. And if you look at it from the Jewish perspective for how you're going to live forever, and again, from what I remember about like how the Jewish faith works, again, the only way that you get to paradise and long lasting paradise up there is through good deeds. And I don't really see alchemy as necessarily a good deed thing, like what you're doing it for. I don't know. I just don't see either way why an angelic being would grant somebody immortality. So that makes me wonder, is he going out to some other sort of immortal being? Because I just can't see the Abrahamic faiths, angels or God granting this.
Well, it's like, hey, you really went down a certain path and you dedicated yourself, and hey, it wasn't the one we actually wanted you to take, but we're going to appreciate your good efforts and go ahead and let you in anyway, or something like that, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can see it maybe from the Jewish perspective. Again, if it's a you have to do good deeds. Like if he's making some sort of bargain, but again, if you're making some sort of bargain that you're going to do good deeds with what you're doing, like his, he was very well off. His wife, per NL, I think Flamel, she had acquired a lot of wealth through a previous marriage that she had. It was like two previous marriages.
Yeah.
And even on their deathbed, like even on their deaths, they were very charitable people. So I could definitely see it from the perspective of I will give you immortality, but in order to do that, you're going to have to use your immortality for good and helping other people. And maybe that was the way that they did it, was they just offered charity. Maybe they just offered to just care for people throughout their immortality. Maybe that was the deal they had to make.
Well, and I think that's something that whenever it comes to the idea of good works, that's a very morally subjective term. So now we're actually looking at stuff. So what would the divine determine as good works? It's like, is it a noble pursuit, life free of sin, or is it a life that enriches the lives of others? So it's like we have to kind of assess at that point. I mean, to me, that's so easy to argue one way or another. Noble deeds being something that actually leads towards immortality, it's like, since it's so subjective, it's kind of like a hard way to kind of rank and identify, like, what is that going to be. It's like, how do you actually determine that? So as far as that being like I kind of joked as a backdoor pass, kind of gets you in, kind of way. I don't see that being a thing, because that's a very subjective thing. I mean, are you going to have a divine lawyer angel that's going to argue your case before the jury up there and argue your way in through the back door, or like how's that work?
I mean, the Bible is, especially even in the Old Testament, I mean, it's full of people that have the divine that comes to them that are very specific on what they want them to do. Don't eat this fruit. Build this ark. Let my people go. But so it could be one of those of when they did it, that they had to be very specific of what are you going to do with this power that they give you. But even then, man, immortality seems to be, I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be in the wheelhouse of those faiths.
Right. Well, and as far as the idea of him practicing alchemy, reading up on like the superstition aspect of it, because like I said, in this era, when he was alive, which granted, it's a long time ago. People can have maybe some dates wrong by a few years, but it's estimated, like you said, the 14th to 15th. That's about the range that we're looking at here. And this is the era where alchemy took that kind of, superstitious turn from the monarchies, and people were kind of like, hey, they practice alchemy, ooga booga booga, like kind of like with in the in the United States with the Salem witch trials. To me, it's one of those things where alchemy could have been seen as like a kind of like a spooky thing to kind of justify why somebody got to where they were.
And again, man, you want to talk about people's perceptions on things? Let's keep in mind again the time that Nicolas Flamel is living. The dude is literally living at the turn of the 14th and 15th century. He lived to be 88 years old during the bubonic plague. When the bubonic plague was ravaging Europe, this dude lived to be 88 years old when the average life expectancy of a person was 40.
Yeah,
40.
He wasn't getting COVID.
No, he was not. He was on to something. And on top of that, even a century later, after he supposedly died, the average life expectancy in France is still at best 70. at this time, and which I, by the way, thought was incredibly impressive, and even for then. But I was like, this dude lived to be 88 years old. His wife lived to be 77. So both of them are just completely overshooting how long somebody is supposed to be living uh, during this time period. So it really is easy to kind of see why people might think that this guy might have the secrets to longevity.
I'm not gonna lie, it does raise an eyebrow because statistically, women outlive their husbands.
Oh, absolutely.
And in that time frame, like that's even more of a like of a you got some red lights flashing there. It's kind of like, wait a second, more often than not, men did more of the I guess risky duties that were going to get you sick and eventually dead.
And Nicolas Flamel was a super librarian.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like managed to, during one of the most toxic periods in human history, not only survive, still outlive most people, even in the era that he actually did pass away.
Yeah, not only did he survive, he thrived. And another thing that I found weird too was you would think that, again, if Nicolas Flamel had tapped into the secrets of immortality, something that I noticed was that his wife supposedly passed away before him. Yeah. I don't know if it's supposed to be like this romantic happily ever after. Supposedly they both discovered it, and that's how they could go on. But again, supposedly she passed before him, so I don't know. I hope he didn't practice on her, and that was the first thing he did. I don't know, but I would think if you're going to be married to somebody for probably over 40 years, that if they passed away, and that was supposedly what drove you to maybe seeking immortality, maybe she passed away, and then he that's when he found immortality shortly after that. I don't know if I would want to do that late in life.
Well, maybe, I mean, it could be a couple things. It could be like he was brewing the formula and he was like, here, baby, drink this. It's going to make you forever. And then she's like, wow, and then falls over. And then like, he's like, oh, got the measurements wrong. And then he like, adjusts it or something. But it could have been something as simple as, in order to live forever and be undisturbed, we need to fake our deaths. And then the whole idea there is that I need you to pretend to die first, because if we both die simultaneously, it's too suspicious.
I would really wonder what people would say about Nicolas Flamel closer to the time that he was supposedly dying. I really wonder about like if there's any change of his character that occurs at this time, because I've been saying it throughout the course of our discussion on immortality that I think honestly one of the hardest parts about being immortal would be the relationships that you have with people and how hard that would be, because again, if you live, human beings are social creatures, okay?
Right.
And if you're an immortal being and you watch all of those you care about die around you, I think it would cause you to not want to create relationships with people around you, because again, you know that you're going to lose them, and at the same time, that's going to have an effect on your psyche.
Well,
and I don't think for the better.
I agree with you if the person was normal. If they were what we would identify in today's standards as antisocial.
Yeah.
Social and convenient relationships with people simply as a means to an end as they live their life, almost kind of like a Bram Stoker's Count Dracula kind of sense. I guess that's a whole nother level of immortality. Well, you can approach that at a different time.
I think you're right. That's what happens is you become very cold. You become very disconnected. You become you become Dr. Manhattan from The Watchmen. You become disconnected from the human existence.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's going to come out in your person. It's going to come out in your personality.
Yeah.
So I have a very hard time understand, like, unless you come up with some sort of way to uh, handle the immortality. I mean, oh gosh, what was it? Anne Rice's, like in her Vampirism book, she addresses that. Like they had to find some sort of method if they're gonna live forever. They had to come to terms with that in some sort of way. Like if you think like Queen of the Damned, like
Yeah.
the painter matriarch vampire of that family, the way that she literally was able to keep her psyche together was she uh, kept safe, like her the great family is what they call it. Like she became a caretaker of their family. She found
Yeah.
some way to be able to handle that sort of immortality. So it makes me wonder if Nicolas Flamel was able to do that and continued to be able to do that. What did he? What did he do? If I had to make a guess, and if I had to make a guess, I would say probably he continued his work as a manuscript uh, collector because I think you could do that in a way of being able to stay connected with humanity, of collecting like great literary works throughout time. I mean, one of the things I love to do is I love to collect like old role playing books. That's one of the things I love to collect, and read them and appreciate them. And I think if he did something like that, I think he'd. If I had to make a guess, I would say that's how he came to terms with immortality.
So he's a librarian somewhere.
Yeah, I think he could do it. That might, in a way, honestly, be able to make it so that he could continue to connect with people and connect with humanity. Because
Have
without
we?
that, I just don't see what else. I just don't see what else he did. I didn't read anywhere about him having kids. He may have. I'm not sure, but
I didn't find anything on children either. Which would be interesting, especially if any of your followers would want to comment on that and be like, "Hey, this was his kid." That'd be an interesting
yeah,
thing for
absolutely,
us to see later.
absolutely,
But
absolutely.
one of the things that I think is interesting, as far as like that idea of him like um, as a person that we know historically did exist, we actually have like a lot of information on this guy. You know, his marriage. You know, the works he did for people. But this idea of aspect, I was really shocked to see like apparently it's like I said before, it was such a like a and even today, like if you bring up alchemy or the idea of the philosopher's stone, I mean, heck, with that Harry Potter thing, immediately they were wanting to. Well, let's not say that word. Let's not say philosopher's stone. That's too archaic. We can't have people talking about that. Um, but then whenever you reference other people like Isaac Newton, who was into alchemy and seeking the philosopher's stone, and then they talk about him and they're like, oh well, he was one of the grandfathers of chemistry. And it's like, first off, you can't use it as a slanderous term for one of these dudes, and then immediately like come over here and say, oh, but this guy who practiced alchemy, this guy knew about something. Because like whenever I was researching what Isaac Newton thought about um, the idea of alchemy and the philosopher's stone, his approach was a lot different.
So Isaac Newton was an alchemist looking for the Philosopher's Stone. I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, that was the thing. Apparently, like, okay, like everybody's like, oh, he contributed much to like, optics and to astronomy and physics, and it's like, okay, well, a fraction, the rest went to alchemy. Like, he a majority of his work went to alchemy, and so when people like and diss like alchemists, and give him a bunch of crap. Like the dude who you guys credit with discovering gravity was an alchemist, and that's like a huge thing. His pursuits of his studies, combining his theories with alchemy. It starts to kind of beg into question, what did he actually think the Philosopher's Stone did?
And he would have
And
actually had the ability to have Nicholas Flamel's supposed work, or at least his supposed works, uh, like 40 years later. Because by the time that Isaac Newton, I think, enters college, it's about 40 years later after uh, Nicholas Flamel's manuscript is supposedly posted again, is published in London. So Isaac Newton would have had access to this book, and he would have had access to at least the groundwork that supposedly Nicolas Flamel left.
Yeah. And I know that because of the era that that book was published, Isaac Newton was very hesitant to talk about his interests in alchemy. Like he did not want people to know how much he was into it. But
No, and I believe that too, man. If you think about anybody that practices any sort of magical art, I know many of my coworkers that have done that don't tell people at work. So many of my coworkers do not know how many people actually practice magical arts. You would be surprised how much people keep that to themselves for fear of repercussions.
well, I mean, let's be real. I mean, you work in a psychological community and you start telling people you're practicing magic, they're gonna look at you a little different.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But not to discredit or disprove it. I mean, it's just one of those things that whenever you have the organized thought, be alchemy is, and that's why I think like for Flamel, the idea of his research and his pursuits, and then it having such like a negative connotation behind the idea of him seeking that philosopher's stone. Like people often say, oh, well, they're seeking the philosopher's stone, and there's always this selfish agenda. Like very rarely do you hear people say they're seeking it for the betterment of humanity. It's always for this like personally driven cause.
Oh, absolutely.
And with Isaac Newton, for example, involving gravity and how gravity has, like as far as our understanding of gravity having influence over time. One of the things that I remember while doing research for this, we what is it? Is it radium that decays and turns into another element?
Let's go with that. For the purpose of this podcast, let's go with that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So a periodic element, and it's radioactive, and as it decays, eventually turns into another element. So we understand.
Actually, the more that I think about it, I think the answer is no. It is not radium that he was talking about.
Well, it's not radium, but what?
No, I think that was Madame Curie that did that. Sorry.
Oh, is that okay? But anyway, but the idea being like in scientific circles, transmutation was witnessed in lab settings, basically. Like they're watching elements convert into other elements. So it's like stuff like that where you're breaching alchemy is so close to chemistry. And these guys in the 1400s understood that. And it just, I think that right there in itself it's kind of mind blowing. So people like Nicolas Flamel, I mean, people nowadays might give you kind of like, might kind of scoff and be like, oh, those crackpot alchemists. No, I think, dude, I think it wasn't 50 again. They were doing.
And they also might want to keep it quiet because again, it's only 50 years after Nicolas Flamel supposedly died, air quotes, that the Spanish Inquisition happens.
Yep.
People need to have some context as a little bit about why people would probably want to keep this secret of what they were doing. So, because this gives you a lot of power, and again, if somebody else doesn't have that power, that makes you a threat.
Right.
Right. That's just food for thought on that. Is there anything else you wanted to add about Nicolas Flamel or anything else on the Philosopher's Stone or anything else on alchemy that we've talked about so far?
Well, I will say one of the things was that the book that it said that on his way back from Spain, the sage that he reportedly met identified Flamel's book as being a copy of the original book of Abramel and the Mage.
Mm-hmm.
So then I looked into that book. And then Abramel and the Mage is actually a story of an Egyptian mage named Abraham, or Abramelin.
Right.
Who taught the magical works to Abraham of Worms.
There you go.
Who's a Jew in Worms, Germany. So again, so you have an Abraham or Melon, so I guess like the names are interchangeable, but Abramelin taught magic to Abraham
Mm-hmm.
of Worms in Germany, or Worms, Germany. I talked about that myth of the wandering Jew aspect. It's possible that the wandering Jew is Abraham of Worms.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And this guy was actually presumed to live, Abraham of Worms was presumed to live from 1362 to 1458.
So he lived during the
he
time of Nicolas Flamel.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that means that these two dudes could have actually met on the road,
Absolutely.
at some point. Um, One of the things that that I think is kind of weird though is how this book, this story, um, actually doesn't really get published mainstream until I think it's like 1700s.
Yeah.
I think, or like sometime around there. It's it's published in Germany. But then this guy, this scholar, he's like a German scholar. He actually starts debating about how he believes that this story was originally written by some rabbi and who lived in this time frame as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I mean, like when people are like, "Oh, well, it's just legend." Well, okay, it might be just legend, but a lot of these legends, they're syncing up really well.
Absolutely. But I have a hard time believing, honestly, though, that the Wandering Jew is going to be wanting to, because again, I don't think he really truthfully knows a whole lot. Again, if the Wandering Jew in mythology is supposed to be cursed with immortality until the end of days. So this is probably not a guy who can handle it well. And honestly, probably isn't the kind of guy that would want other people to share in his fate unless he himself is trying to do this as a I don't know, to help, misery loves company sort of thing. I don't know.
Well, and that begs into question: is alchemy actually a noble pursuit?
I have a hard time believing, honestly, that it is. There's I get the whole idea. And I'm gonna kind of wrap up my thoughts on alchemy with this. The more that I have researched it, there's two elements of it. One is that there's this huge secrecy behind it. And again, as I said before in the beginning of the episode, the only reason why you would have the secrecy is A, because you're a charlatan, or B, because some of your components or practices are so dark you can't talk about it in the public light.
Right.
Now, as we have covered in this episode at the same time, it's not like necessarily the public light is all that tolerant. So even in a little bit, so even if you were doing something probably that just is, I don't know, mundane or natural, I don't know, or okay, necessarily the public light might not necessarily be very tolerant of it when they're doing it. I mean, and that begs the question. I'll leave that for you guys to think about that in the comments below. Do you guys think that these alchemists like Nicolas Flamel and Isaac and other people, do you think that they were hiding their research because they were charlatans? Is it because they just needed to not be persecuted by other people, or do you think that maybe they were doing something dark? I don't know. Or maybe at the end of the day, maybe it's just something that part of the journey in alchemy is you have to learn it for yourself. And that's part of the journey. Maybe that's part of the quest for it. Maybe that's part of the success is you had to go on this journey in order to find it. I have no idea, but I want to hear your guys' thoughts about this story and this stuff in general in the comments below. Please let us know. If you have any questions about Nicolas Flamel, anything you guys want clarified, anything you guys else want us to talk about this, leave a comment below. We'll absolutely cover it in the next episode, regardless of whatever guest that I have on, or if it's Vic, that'll be even better. If you guys like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It's the easiest way to help us show your appreciation. Definitely leave a review. That's the best thing you can do to help out the podcast. leave a review on what you guys think about this. You know, good, bad, ugly. Let us know. It helps us. It helps us get better, guys. Frank, I want to thank you so much, man, for coming on today and talking with me.
Yeah, always a pleasure. I greatly appreciate coming in and talking always.
Absolutely, guys. And one thing that I want to leave a note too, Frank's been talking for a while about starting his own project called the Whiskey Conspiracies, where he talks about conspiracy theories. And I'm telling you guys, tell it, man. Do you guys think that he needs to be doing it? Put it in the comments below. Let us know. You know, because I've been trying to arm twist him forever to get him to do it.
Yeah.
With that, guys, I think that is where we will wrap up at least today's episode. So until next time, guys, keep believing, because we'll keep listening. Now, we're going to continue this podcast for a little bit, where we continue talking for a little bit longer for our patrons. The segment that we call the Pillow Talk. The Pillow Talk segment is a segment where we keep going a little bit, talking more about maybe this subject or another subject around immortality. If you guys want the rest of this podcast, all you got to do is go over to our Patreon and sign up. For as little as $1 a month, you guys get the full episode of every single podcast episode, as well as a ton of bonus videos that we have put up on our Patreon. So, with that being said, let's keep going. I wanted to talk to you, Frank. I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about a guy who is a little unknown character in American politics. You know, for those of you that know me, my background in college was political science, and particularly third parties. I've always been fascinated with third parties, how they work, why they form, what's their role in government. And honestly, when you look into them, you find literally some of the coolest people to learn more about. Even in today's election, I'm not going to go into it, but even in today's election, you just learn all about these really cool people. And I thought it'd be really fun today to talk about one of those people. And kind of going along with the theme of immortality, I thought we could talk about Leonard Live Forever Jones. Like I feel when I say that, like I have to say it like a boxing announcer, man. Like Leonard Live Forever Jones sounds like a guy who should be taking on like Floyd Mayweather for like his championship belt, man. You gotta. Now this guy does not look like he's a guy that could take Floyd Mayweather in a fight. I'm just gonna throw that out there, but so Leonard Live Forever Jones was this larger than life guy that lived kind of around the early part of the 19th century. You know, it was 1804 is the time that this guy is kind of making a name for himself. And he was a guy that he got rich being a land speculator in Kentucky. And he got pretty rich doing this, man. He got a whole bunch of money. And then after he got all this money, he decided to do the next thing on his list, which was find religion. He's like, I got a bunch of money. I'm good. I've got financial wellness. Now I'm a really talented person.